convention. The conclusion. On News and Review today, the Liberals choose a new leader. Hello, I'm Carla Robinson. Next to election night, it could be one of the most exciting things in politics when a party decides who is going to be the next leader. Canada's official opposition party made that decision this fall, picking a person to head a party that is as old as the country itself. Back in 1867, as Canada was born, so was the Liberal Party. It was the first opposition party up against the first Prime Minister, Conservative Sir John A. Macdonald. The Liberals had some success in those early days after Confederation, but after the turn of the century into the 20th century, look out. The Liberals would eventually be dubbed Canada's natural governing party, dominating Canadian governments in the 20th century under Prime Ministers such as Wilfrid Laurier, Lester Pearson, Pierre Trudeau, and Jean Chrétien.
The one thing that we Liberals have always understood is that it is a great privilege, c'est un privilège, to serve Canada. Thank you very much.
Paul Martin was a Liberal Prime Minister as well, but after losing the election last February, he stepped aside. And so, 9 months of campaigning began to find a new leader. 9 months of campaigning with 8 candidates staying in the race right up until the convention. Here's a look at the contenders, starting with the candidate who seemed to have the most support going into the vote. The CBC's Susan Bonner now on Michael Ignatieff.
No, we're doing okay.
These people see Ignatieff as an internationally acclaimed white knight who can lead Liberals back to power and Canada on to great things.
Don't worry about the press.
Sure, they're aware others see an aloof intellectual who has spent 36 years living outside the country, a rookie politician who has blundered. Mere plot twists, they say, in the story of a man whose life has been leading exactly to this moment.
The greatest personal experience of my life was going to that 68 convention that chose Trudeau. I was on the floor.
The whole history of Yugoslavia is...
But after 68, Ignatieff left Canada. From Europe, he forged an international reputation as an intellectual, writer, war correspondent.
This is just beyond anything I've seen before.
For more than 3 decades, he enjoyed a citizen of the world celebrity that only occasionally featured Canada.
You realize when you're in other places, you can't actually be a citizen of any other place but Canada. And that sense of citizenship, that this is the only place where I actually belong, has always been a part of my experience of being somewhere else.
When he came home to run for Parliament, he was accused of being out of touch with Canadian sensibilities. He'd supported the U.S. going to war in Iraq.
I'm human, not always perfect.
He's not playing it safe, he says, making controversial policy pledges on everything from the environment to his stand on Quebec. His support for calling Quebec a nation within Canada has other candidates on the attack, but delegates intrigued, he says.
They like the idea that I have convictions. They like the idea that I've been positive. And so I get people coming to me as a result of this. The stuff that's risky is the key to my success.
The other frontrunner has a lot of experience as a politician and as a leader, but not a lot of experience as a Liberal. The CBC's chief political correspondent, Keith Bogue, now on Bob Rae.
How are you?
A youth delegate from Wildrose.
Nice to see you.
Add them up. He's already a veteran of 5 provincial elections, 3 federal elections, and 1 provincial leadership campaign. And he's won them all as a New Democrat. As Liberals now consider whether they should buy what he's selling, they at least know what they would be getting.
All the negatives were known when I started, right? I mean, it's not as if there's anything that I've said or done that people aren't aware of.
But consider what that includes.
And he has not responded to those.
For years as a federal MP in the 80s, or a provincial MPP in Ontario after that, or during his term as the province's only NDP premier, he happily delivered a thick catalogue of tirades against the party he now seeks to lead, while Liberals retailed their own case against him.
And it is time to undo the damage in the province of Ontario.
These are things not easily forgotten, And he says Liberals tell him this all the time.
Look, I think you're a great guy. I think you're the best person. I think you're the best leader. I think you're the most talented person. But my problem is that I told people for 3 or 4 elections that you were a goof.
But it's not just Liberals who remember a very bleak time in Ontario when Ray was Premier. The province, like much of North America, was struggling through a deep recession. Not his fault, but
I could have handled things better in terms of understanding what the impact of the recession was on people and on the public debt and what took place.
Running a government was a transformative experience, he says. It broadened his outlook, helped him to identify with Liberals and what he calls their culture of government.
You got enough of this, guys?
So now you've met the top couple of contenders going into the convention. But while those two battled it out for the top job, would someone else sneak up to and steal a win from them both? Gerard Kennedy placed 3rd in the pre-convention polls. Would delegates turn to him as a compromise candidate? Gerard Kennedy is the 2nd youngest in the race at 46 years old, but he's been in the public eye for a long time.
We run this operation with 90,000 pounds of food going in and out a month.
Back in the 1980s, about 20 years ago, he left school to run a food bank in Edmonton.
The only thing that they can rely on is a hamper from us.
Kennedy also got a lot of notice and acclaim when he moved on to run Toronto's food bank.
It made me angry about the inequities in the country. It made me try and find a way to channel that into something worthwhile. And it also made me feel a strong connection, both to people in need and also to average Canadians who responded.
Okay.
Kennedy moved into politics 10 years ago at the provincial level in Ontario. He served as education minister before quitting to try for the top job in the federal Liberals. So, one knock against him, no federal political experience. Another?
C'est dommage.
His inexperience speaking French.
I characterize my French as good enough in terms of understanding Quebecers and other French Canadians, and also in terms of expressing on their behalf a lot of their hopes and aspirations. But not good enough in terms of that I accept that that's where it will stay.
Before the convention, Kennedy was running 2nd among delegates outside Quebec. Many people seemed drawn to him as a fresh, new option.
Bonjour, mes amis.
Also among the top 4 was Stéphane Dion, the only candidate with extensive experience as a federal politician. In fact, he has spent more time in cabinet than all of the other candidates combined. But would that experience be enough to lead him to victory on voting day?
The 4th place candidate is getting more and more attention, being taken more seriously by the media. Could he be leader?
Now he's happy.
Detractors say he would have to ditch his stodgy image that's as bland as pasta without the sauce. But make no mistake, this unfailingly polite and sincere candidate is into the hard sell.
I'm good to deliver speech. I invite people to see me delivering speeches. Now we are a movement, and we will be on time a winning movement.
Then there's his English. Of all the candidates,
I am the one with the strongest French accent. Nothing must be taken for given.
his rivals struggle with their French. He's trying to make sure his ideas can be understood in English.
It's better to be low and slow, so I will work on it.
And Dion is working hard. It helps that he's always needed less than 5 hours sleep a night.
You will be there? As one of my delegates? Yes. Thank you so much. I think leadership is not something that you claim, it's something that you show.
Dion says he's shown us a lot, most recently as Minister of the Environment. While critics call his record there mediocre, he got kudos for brokering a consensus at an all-night meeting during last year's climate change conference in Montreal. But Dion is probably best known for his work on the issue that brought him to Ottawa, the fight for federalism. He was lured by Jean Chrétien from the comfort of academia to politics just after the heart-stopping 1995 referendum. He arrived in Ottawa with his trademark knapsack. As Unity Minister, he brought in the Clarity Act. It demands a clear referendum question and a strong majority if Quebecers want to separate.
Will dissuade the Quebec government to try a confused referendum.
He was vilified by the nationalists as a vendu, a sellout, and portrayed as a rat by editorial cartoonists.
I made decisions that have been very controversial, but I think people over the years learned to respect me for that. The Mayarsky is there.
What's his name?
Kyoto.
Dion says his experience stacks up well against his rivals, without the mea culpas.
But they never insulted anyone, and they never mislead the Canadian people. So why I would apologize? I have nothing in my past that justify an apology. Allez, au revoir. Goodbye.
How would Dion win? Delegates would have to abandon the other candidates, judge that they're just too flawed for the job. They would have to see Stéphane Dion with fresh eyes. A gargantuan leap? Maybe. But Dion says he's used to being underestimated in this game of surprises.
As for the last 4 candidates, they didn't necessarily have much of a chance of winning, but they were expected to play a big role at the leadership convention.
The candidates all have one thing in common. Each has less than 5% of the support of the declared delegates. But for some, just the experience of running has proved to be positive. For others, not so much. Joe Volpe has probably lost the most in this race. He plays up his experience, 18 years an MP, twice a cabinet minister.
So we're all going to obey the rules.
But it was the rules that gave the Volpe campaign the most trouble. First, his team accepted and later returned donations from children. Then the campaign signed up members who were actually dead. Supporters defected and fellow candidates pressured him to quit. He scrambled to salvage his image and his leadership bid. Today, he says others are to blame.
We have general media.
Scott Bryson has plenty of material for his convention video.
It's been almost 10 years since I was first.
At 39, he's a veteran politician, a former cabinet minister, and an MP of nearly 10 years. But like many veterans, he's got baggage. Bryson's career began as a progressive conservative MP. He ran for the leadership of that party and finished last, then decided to become a liberal.
There's a lot of stuff that we have now posted on YouTube.
Bryson says his issue in this campaign isn't baggage, it's his age. He says many delegates view his candidacy as a positioning exercise. In a famous Montreal deli,
I'm sorry, is everybody okay?
Thank you.
Always.
Ken Dryden is certainly the most recognizable candidate. He's tried to position himself as the one with heart and passion. A legendary NHL goalie, he is revered by Canadians.
I, Ken Dryden.
His other credentials, lawyer and former cabinet minister. But Dryden may be out of his league this time. He struggled in the French language debates. He failed to raise enough money to pay his campaign staff, and some liberals say he lacks charisma.
I'm here to be in politics.
The biggest winner? Oddly enough, Martha Hall Findlay, even though she's in last place.
I'd give it at least.
9 months ago, the Toronto lawyer entered the race, a virtual unknown. She has limited funds, no elected experience, and her Liberal membership, it's only a few years old.
Women have said to me, thank goodness that you're running.
She is the only woman left in this race, and now Liberals everywhere know who she is.
I have a tremendous amount to contribute to the direction of the Liberal Party, to the direction of this country, on a whole range of issues.
And so the stage was set for 3 days in Montreal, a dramatic 3 days as about 5,000 Liberals got together to vote. They ended up voting 4 different times. The first ballot had Michael Ignatieff in front and Bob Rae second. But the numbers for Ignatieff weren't as high as his team had hoped. Plus, Stéphane Dion had moved up a spot to third. He had what they call in sports the big mo, momentum. The last place finisher on that ballot, Martha Hall Findlay, dropped out and eventually dropped by the Dion camp with her support. Through other rounds of voting, other low-place candidates dropped out, a couple of them joining forces with Rae. But none of the contenders went over to Ignatieff. And when Kennedy made the move to support Dion, it all came down to a showdown between two. Here's the CBC's Paul Hunter with the exciting conclusion.
It was a final ballot few would have predicted when this contest began, but with 6 of the 8 contenders eliminated during 2 days of voting, the choice for federal Liberals electing their party leader came down to this: early favorite Michael Ignatieff or dark horse Stéphane Dion. The result?
Mr. Stéphane Dion, 2,521. Mr. Michael Ignatieff, 2,084.
Dion, 10 years in MP with strong links to former Prime Minister Chrétien, was given little chance of taking his party's leadership. He won despite that on the first ballot fewer than 1 in 5 delegates voted for him. But Saturday morning he'd squeaked into 3rd place, then increased his margin, and then with the help of rival-turned-ally Gerard Kennedy, jumped to 1st. On the 4th and final ballot, he stayed there.
The most exciting race in the history of our party is over. Let's get ready for the election!
Such a surprise win, Dion may well have written his victory speech on the way to the podium. Now he has other challenges, including ensuring the hard-fought contest he's just won doesn't leave his party divided.
All the ideas that the other candidates in the party brought on the table, all the ideas that Canadians communicated to us through this race, we need them.
Note the green shirts on his supporters. The former Environment Minister also pushes hard on the need to fight global warming.
I invite each of us to commit to tackle with the same determination the issue of our time, sustainable development. And with Canadians, we will deliver again.
But on everyone's mind, that looming next federal election expected sometime next year. So, to Stephen Harper, this warning from the new Liberal leader.
Stephen Harper, we are counting the days until the next election.
And so it was that Liberals celebrated the scenario so few of them might have expected when the race to be leader began.
And that's News in Review. I'm Carla Robinson. Thanks for watching.
I would say most dangerously, North Korea's emergence as a nuclear weapon state increases the risk of a nuclear 9/11.
On News in Review today, the North Korean nuclear crisis. Hello, I'm Carla Robinson. On the list of scary things, a nuclear bomb has to be way up there. A nuclear bomb in the hands of a rogue nation is even more frightening. That's what this story is about. North Korea has tested a nuclear device, a bomb. It did it in defiance of the rest of the world. The question now, what can be done? CBC reporter Michelle Cormier was in neighboring South Korea when the news came.
It is the announcement the world had been dreading. North Korean television reported the country had successfully held its first ever nuclear test. It is a great source of joy for North Korea, said the announcer, which will bring peace and security to the region. The test was conducted in Kilju, northeast of the capital, Pyongyang. There was outside confirmation of an explosion measuring close to 4 in magnitude. However, it was not clear whether a nuclear test had actually taken place. Belonging to the nuclear club has long been an ambition of Kim Jong-il, the reclusive communist dictator of North Korea. His regime pulled out of disarmament talks 2 years ago and test-fired its first ballistic missile in July. News of the blast reverberated around the world. South Korea immediately put its military on high alert. In Seoul, South Korean and Japanese leaders condemned the test. North Korea with nuclear weapons constitutes a great threat to the world, said Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. The news was especially bitter for South Korea, which had been advocating restraint and openness towards its northern neighbor.
이후에도 평화적 해결.
South Korea won't be patient on everything, warned its president, accept concessions on everything as it did in the past. South Koreans took to the streets in protest against the nuclear test.
North Korea invaded South Korea in the 1950s, setting off a 3-year conflict that involved 25 nations. Canada fought on the side of a United Nations coalition defending the South. North Korea got support from China and the old Soviet Union. The heavily armed border zone is a testament to the tensions that remain more than half a century later. The Koreas still haven't signed a peace treaty, so you can understand why South Koreans would be worried. Many other people were too.
And all of us agree that the proclaimed actions taken by North Korea are unacceptable.
In a written statement, Prime Minister Stephen Harper called it irresponsible and dangerous, an act that seriously undermines both regional peace and stability and global efforts to halt the spread of nuclear weapons.
A unanimous condemnation of the North Korean test.
Denunciations were issued, meetings were convened, sanctions were imposed. But what could be done to make Kim Jong-il back down? As Joe Schlesinger reports, the overwhelming feeling seems to be not much.
It could be a long wait. North Korea has some powerful weapons to resist complying with the UN's demands. In the front line, an army more than 1 million strong, poised along the demilitarized zone separating the North from South Korea. It has enough firepower to all but destroy the South. The North's hardline response to the sanctions has made South Koreans nervous. In Seoul, a city under the gun, civilians rushed for shelter in emergency drills. The 20 million people who live in the capital and its surroundings are within